Okay, right. I'm going to ask. Can I just be asked that? Right. I'm going to ask. I'll do that enough. Right. Chardonnay. Right. How have alveoli adapted to make them more efficient in collecting oxygen? Sorry? Right, large surface area. Dylan, right, I want you to tell me, please, how are alveoli adapted to increase the efficiency of diffusion?
They can cook by capillaries, then mice, and then they're very large cells.
Brilliant, well done. Okay, and then the question, what you just have to do is just have to elaborate on that a little bit. That's well done. Okay, you got 3, you can probably get them all now. Right, so that's the alveoli. Now, what I did then is I just went and tried to find an electron microscope picture of alveoli. Right, and basically what this is then a proper picture, right, of alveoli. I don't know how they do it, it's absolutely brilliant. There's a little vein going in. All the little red bits then are tiny little capillaries, and those purple bits then are the alveoli. And literally what they're doing there is, so it does sort of, if you kind of imagine it a little bit, it does sort of look a little bit like grapes, where that's the vine that comes in, and then you've got grapes all the way around the outside of it. Blood goes in, blood comes out, and it takes the oxygen with it and gets rid of carbon dioxide. Okay, very, very clever. Now, the other one that they're going to ask you about is to do with digestion. All right, so what I want you to do is, in your exercise books, right, just write the title digestion, please. And it's the 19th of October today. Put it down as digestion. And what we're going to do is we're just going to talk about how we actually digest food and how we absorb the food. If you don't digest it, you ain't going to absorb it, and if you don't absorb it, you're not going to digest it. 19th of October. Okay, so digestion. Now, you should have done digestion back in year 7 and year 8, right? There are 3 specific sort of food groups that you must have all the time that your digestive system breaks down. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, okay? If I eat a load of carbohydrates, my body breaks it down into glucose, which is there. Right, so underneath digestion, I just want you to write the word carbohydrates, and that's broken down into glucose. Okay, so carbohydrates are things like bread, pasta, and bananas, right? All sorts of sort of high carbohydrate food. Carbohydrates itself, you can't do anything with. So what you have to do is you have to cut it up. So you get the carbohydrates, you cut them up into glucose. Then when you've got the glucose, what you can then do is you then use them. The second one, proteins. Again, if you eat red meat, if you eat eggs, if you eat stuff like that, it's absolutely full of protein. Proteins are then cut up into amino acids. So this time, proteins are cut up into amino acids. And then what you can then do is you can then absorb those amino acids, you can do whatever you want with them. The last one are fats, right? Fats are cut up, right, using enzymes into fatty acids, right? And basically what they can then do is they can then get absorbed. Fats, into fatty acids. Right? So if you go home tonight and you go to the local shop and you get a big lump of lard, right, and you take a good chew on it, you know, which is like white, it looks a bit like white butter, right? And it's just pure animal fat, right? So if you went out and you found a cow, right, around the outside of the cow, what there is loads of white fat, right? You take that white fat off, and what they do is, or what people do is they put it into a block, and it's like lard, which is like pure white fat. Okay? If you then ate that, which people don't do, and you shouldn't do, right, what you're eating is you're eating massive molecules of fat, all right? Goes into your system, right, without a certain process, you couldn't do anything with it. You can't do anything with it, it just goes straight through you, right? So what happens is, you get an enzyme that breaks it down into fatty acids, and fatty acids are then dead small, okay? So that's kind of what your actual digestion is. Now, we're not actually looking at digestion today, we're looking at how we absorb it. Now, I showed you a picture before, right, of the alveoli, which is that. This is then a picture of the inside of your intestine. Okay? Now, what you'd always imagine, right, so that picture that's up on the wall there behind Chloe, right, what you've got is you've got the small intestine, the large intestine at the bottom. What you imagine it is, it's just like a long tube, right? And it is a long tube, right? But if I pulled my intestine out here just for a laugh, right, my small intestine, what it would do is it would go from here to that door over there, right? It'd be long enough to do that. Large intestine is probably about maybe 1.5 meters, 2 meters long, and that is all squashed into this certain area here. Yep.
How is that called the large intestine that only goes like that, the small intestine can go?
Because it's the thickness of it. So the large intestine might be that thick, small intestine is a lot smaller. So large intestine might be 50 pence a piece, small intestine might be 5 pence a piece. Right, the actual diameter of it. Right, so it's nothing to do with the length. Kian?
Is it true that if all your veins, if they combine, like you go all the way from?
Possibly, I don't know all the facts of it, but yeah. But my small intestine, right, I can remember this is really sad, where when you used to be able to do experiments for animals, I can remember being in university, we had a rat, and we took the intestine out of the rat and skipped with it, all right? And obviously that's a pretty horrible thing to do, and it's just no way on this planet ever do anything like that, right? But small intestine is actually very long, yeah.
We used to dissect frogs.
Yeah, we used to be able to dissect frogs, but we can't anymore. So this is then pictures of the inside of your intestine. And what they've got is, it looks like a massive amount of hairs, right? They're hairs, and that's then zoomed in. So that little point there is that little point there, right? These are then from an older person where the villi are then just kind of not looking quite as healthy, right? And they are then just little hairs that are then in there. The computerized version of it, right, then looks a bit like this. So what you look here, this is kind of the main intestine, how you imagine your intestine would be, like a flat tube. What you've got coming out of it is you've got villi or villus. What they are is loads and those little fingers, literally like that. Going up inside there, you've got blood, and then you've got blood coming out. What do you think the job of a villi is? Robert?
So let's say you ate like an apple, like when you chew it, it grabs onto like some parts of the apple, and like all the like protein or whatever is inside that, it absorbs it down, and then what resonates then that's all.
Yeah, so basically what these are there for absorption. Now the biggest key part to it is the fact that, right, you usually think of a small intestine tube just being a flat tube, a bit like a hose pipe, right? But as soon as you then do villi in there, what are you massively increasing again, just like we did with the alveoli? Sorry?
Surface area.
Surface area, that's the whole point in them, right? If you didn't have these villi, you would then really, really struggle. When we talked about cystic fibrosis, one of the biggest problems is mucus. What the mucus is, it kind of blocks these. Right? If it blocks those, you haven't got as big a surface area, so you can't absorb the food as easily. Robert?
Does motion affect that?
Smoking affects everything, right? So every single organ in you.
Affects like your intestine.
It does somehow. I'm not quite sure how smoking actually affects the intestine, but I don't think it has a massive impact on that. Right. Now, what I've done is There's a cut through of your intestine. That then shows the actual villi around the outside of it. Okay? Now, this diagram is then the one that I'm going to want you to try and sketch. Okay? Now, velus means one, villi means more than one. Right? So if you see velus or villi, then that's basically what it means. Right? This diagram here, right, what it does, it shows everything that's basically going on. Then what we'll do after it is we will then discuss, right, exactly how it works. So there is kind of a little fingery thing that's inside your intestine. The red one is the blood vessel going in. The blue one is the blood vessel then that's going out. The yellow one is something called lymph, right? Where you've got an entire new system, completely different system within your body. Do you know what the job of lymph is in your body? Yeah? No, it doesn't give energy. Right? What lymph is kind of like the waste product system. Right? So anything that goes into the villi, right, that the body doesn't want, it goes into the lymph then takes it away to the liver and the kidneys and stuff like that and gets rid of it. So it's a bit like the dustbin there. So that yellow one in the middle there is the dustbin there. Right? So I'm going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes just to try and draw that. Each one of those little squares there is a little mini hair on top of one big hair. Right? So if you think that a villi also has microvilli on them, what's that then going to do to the surface area? It's going to be enormous. Because every little hair has then got little micro hairs on them. Okay, so 5 minutes, when you sketch that, then what we're going to do is going to go through what actually happens. No talking. Finley? if you have finished, I'm going to be asking somebody the definition of diffusion in a minute. Right, so if you finish, you need to look back at your definition of diffusion, right, and then somebody's going to be telling it.
If it just what diffusing is on the front.
Yeah. No, I just want diffusion, just the definition of what it is.
What do you like to
Just do nothing for now, right? And then in about, I don't know, 20 seconds, what I'm going to do is take that picture off. And then what we're going to do is we're going to work out or talk about what the whole point in it is. Yeah.
What are like the little bumps in like the outside?
There'll be, because there's, well, these things here.
Yeah.
Right, well, that's going to come for the next few lessons. Spacewalk, please, Mason. Right? What they are, or what the most thing that happens here is diffusion, where stuff just goes in. All right? From a high concentration to a low concentration. All right? Which is what your diffusion is. Those little things there are for active transport, which is where there's more of it here than there is here. All right? So if you've got, let's say glucose, if you've got more glucose there than there, which direction is the glucose going to go? It's going to go out. Right, if you've got more glucose in here, less glucose out here, right, it goes from a high concentration to a low concentration, it'll go out, right? But you don't want that to happen. So these things here are then something called active transport that we're going to do in a few lessons, and they act a little bit like, you know, those revolving doors that you get at hotels.
Yeah.
And what will happen is the oxygen or the glucose, whatever it is, goes in there. What it does, it kind of spins around and puts it inside there, and then doesn't let it escape. But active transport is using up energy, okay, which is why we don't want that to happen very much. So that's what they are. Right. What's the point in it all? All right. Here is then a cutout of your small intestine, right, where your villi are. Outside here, right, there is only 2 glucose in there, yet there's tons and tons of glucose out here. Kian, what's the definition of diffusion, please?
Is it the movement of molecules from area of a high
Concentration.
Yeah, concentration to an area of
Low concentration. Right, so diffusion is an area of high concentration, low concentration. So I have this deodorant, right? This deodorant sprayed it. I'm not going to do it again. Right, I sprayed this deodorant, and what it did, it gradually spread. High concentration here, low concentration over by Jack, and eventually Jack would then be able to smell it. Right, that's what diffusion is. Now it happens exactly the same in here. All right, and I've got loads of glucose around the outside of here, and I've only got 2 glucose in the middle. So Scarlett, where's the highest concentration of glucose? Outside or inside? Outside, there's loads of it. So what happens is diffusion happens where it goes from a high concentration to a low concentration. So Kian, where does the glucose go? It's not in your book.
Outside.
Sorry?
Outside.
No, you need to listen. Rather than looking down, you need to listen. High concentration outside, low concentration inside. So if it goes from high concentration to low concentration, Harley, where will it go?
It goes to low concentration.
Yeah, it goes from high concentration to low concentration. So where's the actual glucose gone?
Low concentration.
Yeah, where is the low concentration?
It's a fire alarm.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Probably.
I thought you were someone to this is a problem.
To be honest,
Can I hear it?
well, I can hear it, yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, we're not going anywhere, not until it starts buzzing in here. Forget it.
It could be.
Right. If it starts getting hot, right, then we'll go.
Alright, yeah.
So if you get it too late, I built it, so I built it for you.
Okay, so Finley. Yeah, it could be.
I went to watch this woman, watch this woman.
Before half term, yeah.
King of the world, playing outside of the You just got
Right, sit down. Right. No talking. 3, 2, 1. No talking. So we're just going to carry on. All right. So you settle down again. Settle down. So glucose, high concentration to low concentration. Right. So what I want you to do now is underneath where you've drawn that diagram, what I want you to do is I'm going to explain how this actually absorbs glucose. So you will then write down words to the effect of, there's a high concentration of glucose outside the villi, there is a low concentration of glucose inside the villi, so therefore, by diffusion, it will go from the outside to the inside. It goes in your blood, it goes on your body, and then you absorb it. Okay, no talking, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose those people, right, that I think either haven't written anything, are looking down at the desk permanently, okay, to then tell me. I'll just say it again. The way that a villi absorbs glucose is there's a high concentration outside, a low concentration inside. The glucose goes from a high concentration to a low concentration, thus absorbing the glucose. Just while you're writing it, I'll say it again. The villi works by you have a high concentration of glucose on the outside, a low concentration of glucose on the inside. The glucose moves from a high concentration outside to a low concentration on the inside by diffusion. Okay, and what you're doing then is you're getting in the definition that Kean said, which was high concentration to low concentration diffusion.
So do you think that would have been a route for us since we had a test run last week?
But there is going to be one before half term, but we just don't know.
He said we were doing one again this week.
Yeah, there'll be one before we leave for half term.
There's gonna be on Thursday.
Okay, right on 3, 2, 1, no talking. So the way a villi works is you have a high concentration of glucose on the outside, a low concentration of glucose on the inside. The glucose moves from a high concentration to a low concentration by diffusion. And once it's got into the blood system, it goes around the body and you can use it wherever you want. Okay? Exactly the same thing happens with fats, exactly the same thing happens with proteins. That's how you absorb the food. 30 seconds. Can you get your heads, please? Right. Robert, how do we absorb food in that small intestine?
Let's say for example that you eat something that has glucose in it. There's going to be a high concentration of glucose above the ovus of the
Villi.
yeah. And because of diffusion, the particles from the high concentration of glucose are going to move down to the lower concentration of glucose into the virus, and that's when the glucose gets.
That's brilliant. Actually, every little bit of it, and also sounded good. Okay, now, here's another GCSE question up, right, that we're all going to say, right, I've got no idea how to answer it. Okay, now I'm going to give you about 1 minute just to talk to the person next to you or talk to somebody nearby on what are the answers to that question. And you actually know them all, and there's 4 of them. Okay, you've got 1 minute, talk to the person next to you, right, about the answers to that question, please. Explain how the villi in the small intestine are adapted to maximise the rate of absorption of digested food products.
Oh, I know.
Don't say anything.
Is it there?
So, and you said we know the answer.
You do know the answers.
It's good. It's fine.
What's reality?
Right, come on, 3, nobody talks. 3, 2, 1, no talking. Scarlett. What are the 4 answers? No clue? No clue, hand on, Robert. Chardonnay, what are the 4 answers? What? I can't hear you. Very thin. Fine colours. Large surface area. What do we say? Moist. There you go. Scarlett, have you heard those before? You've got all the answers written down already. Right? Thin, moist, large surface area. Okay, and what was the last one? Capillaries. All right. Now, I'm going to give you 6 minutes, right? And 1 person is going to get chosen to answer this question. And what they're going to do is they're going to read it out. Take it off, Mason. And what they're going to do is they're going to read out their answer from their exercise book. Now, because there's only 4 answers to that, right? Which think the other 2 marks could be 4 on this?
Like, questions, full sentences.
Full sentences. Billy?
Good wording.
Good wording and the way that it works. All right. So what I want you to do is you've got literally 6 minutes. All right. In fact, I'll give you 7 minutes so that you can write that question down. Write the question down and put it down as a 6-mark exam question as your title. Then what I'm going to want you to do is exactly as Robert then explained the question before, properly answering the question structured. You've already got the answers. I just wanted the sentences. 7 minutes. Yes, Kean.
Don't get the phone answer.
You don't get what, sorry?
Doesn't phone my answer.
That's 4 minutes. Right. Explain how the villi and the small intestine are adapted. The villi are adapted to maximise the rate of absorption by having a thin outer layer.
Oh,
But what did you say, sir? The VLI.
So just use the question, right? The villi is adapted to maximise the rate of absorption by what's that, Scarlett? This absorbed digested food products. You know, we talked about carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. What you do is when you put them into your digestive system, you break them up. The proteins become amino acids, the carbohydrates become glucose, and the fats become fatty acids. They're the food products, right? Where you've broken them down, and then they're small enough to absorb them. Yeah.
So I put the villi and that's as much as the absorption because of diffusion. Is that right?
That's the starting of it, yeah. Right, but how is it? Explain, right? What are the 4 things to make that your intestine have done, your small intestine has done to make diffusion work better? Right? Go back to the alveoli. The alveoli have done exactly the same thing. So alveoli have got a thin outer layer. What do you think the villi have got?
Very simple. So what's the third one that
Carbohydrates. Right, shh. Shh. If you think you've done it, read it back. Right, read it back from your exercise book. Right, see if it makes sense. Because if it doesn't make sense, the examiner's going to mark it, and they're going to get bored, and they're going to get frustrated, and they're going to give you a rubbish mark.
Why it's good to
No, you don't need to do why it's good, right? Just write down the 4 kind of reasons why. So it needs to read good, right? And then the 4 reasons why. Okay, and that'll be for the marks. An extra question could be that they might add on to it is why is it an advantage that the villi has a thin outer layer? But more stuff in it, right? That's good scientific terminology. Right? So what would you actually say, Ian?
be able to hold it mostly.
That's almost as bad, right? What's the whole point in the process?
To get rid of the.
No, the whole point in this is to actually absorb food, isn't it? Right? If you've got there's your food in your intestine there, right? That there is your intestinal wall, right? And it's that thick. How easy is it to get from that through to there? Right? Or if you get that thick, which one is the easiest bit to pass through? The thinner one, right? So the whole point in having a thin outer layer on villi is the fact that diffusion is easier to occur. Okay? Then you can say all your stuff.
So what's the thing that's moist again?
Right?
What's the thing that's moist again?
The moist is the actual V line themselves are moist, right? To allow diffusion to happen. Okay, you've got about 40 seconds. Someone to read it out. Read out word for word what they've written, and then what we'll do is we'll see whether it makes sense. Okay, Finley.
Yeah.
Right. Explain how the Villi and small intestines adapt to maximize the rate of absorption by the food products.
The villi and small intestine are adapted to maximize the rate of absorption by being very thin, a high network of capillaries, very moist, and has a big surface area. Food products, carbohydrates to glucose, proteins to amino acids, and fats to fatty acids.
Okay, I would give you 5 out of 6 for that. There is one word you didn't mention anywhere near in it.
Diffusion.
You didn't mention the word diffusion, which is the whole point in the process. What there'll be on the mark scheme, it will say 1 mark for it reading well, 4 marks for your answers, 1 mark for the word diffusion. Now, I didn't say that at the start because I wanted to see if you're going to do it. Diffusion has to be in there. Any question about all this sort of stuff, diffusion has to be there. Right? Now, I think your bell goes at, is it about 25 past?
Yeah.
Right, so we've got about 5 minutes. Now, last little thing that we're going to do back today, right, is about this strange little creature. Now that animal itself is real, right? It's called an axolotl.
How do you know?
Yeah, take it right.
Okay, it's called an axolotl. What it is, it's kind of a combination of a lot of things we've talked about. It's got the stem cells where it can grow back arms. It's got all that sort of stuff, right? But the amazing thing about an axolotl is the only creature. Go on.
Don't the earring with the fur down it? Aren't they like sea creatures and stuff like that? So they like clean up.
No, what you're talking about there, like anemones and stuff like that, have things meant to clean it.
No, I mean like they absorb by diffusion, like stuff on the bottom of the ocean, or like stuff off of a fish.
They're basically gills.
Gills.
Right? So basically, the weirdest thing about an axolotl is the fact that it can breathe completely normally underwater, and it can breathe completely normally on land. Yep, Nathan?
What is that on the eyes? It looks like a frog.
Yeah, it does. Right, it does look a bit like a frog. Now, what it can do is, when it's underwater, these things here will act like gills. And literally, it won't absorb all the rubbish in there, that will absorb oxygen. And then what it can do then, it can just walk out in the water, it can walk along, and then what it can do, it can breathe through its mouth. So inside there, it's actually got lungs as well. Now, amazingly as well, it can also absorb through the top of its mouth oxygen. So it's actually got 3 ways in which it can actually breathe. Okay, right. On 3, maybe 12. 3, 2, 1. No talk.
Is it a fish?
Sorry,
You settle down. Right? No, it is. It's absolutely weird. And what it is, it's also prized as a pet. Right? 'Cause obviously it looks completely different. Right? I think they're about that long, right? They do look like a fish, right? They've got legs. This one's obviously growing an extra leg because of all the stem cells and stuff in there. Keenan?
I don't even believe with these products. I don't know what's called, you get like sea drink and do like eggs and put them in water. And I will, it died in 2 days, but I started.
Yeah, yeah, I know. You can't, my daughter had some of those as well.
We've seen
Right.
monkeys.
Yeah, sea monkeys, yeah.
They would sit there.
Right. Now, this,
These regenerate kids.
right.
Yeah, probably for that dirty smile. I'm Danielle Defoe, and you're watching Axolotls. Axolotls are members of the Antistomatidae family and are native to a very small region in Mexico. Axolotls were revered by Aztecs, and their capital city was built on islands in the lakes inhabited by the creatures. But when the Spanish settled in 1521, they drained the lakes and built their city in its place. A first step in driving axolotls towards extinction. As Mexico City continues to grow and pollute, the axolotl population is pushed further and further towards the brink. Today, they can only be found in the wild in Mexico's Xochimilco Lake Complex near Mexico City. Axolotls are unique among salamanders because they are neotenic, which means that they reach adulthood without going through metamorphosis, so they retain all of their juvenile features. Like us millennials, while most salamanders will grow up, lose their...
Right, so basically what that's saying there is that as it grows up, right, what happens to frogs, frogs are tadpole and it's got like a tail, right, and then eventually it doesn't grow its legs, right, trying to go through the growing up stage. Right, what an axolotl doesn't do, it almost doesn't go through puberty. What it does, it stays, right, young, it stays with its gills, right, but then it kind of develops the next stage as well, so it sort of keeps everything.
So their gills and their dorsal fin as they get bigger and emerge onto land, axolotls will keep their feathery external gills and remain underwater permanently. It is extremely rare, but sometimes axolotls will reach maturity and go through metamorphosis. But even then, they tend to keep to the water. This has been accomplished in the lab by injecting them with a shot of iodine, after which they more closely resemble their relatives, the tiger salamander. Axolotls can get pretty big, measuring around a foot or 30 centimeters long, fully grown, and they have long lives, around 15 years in the wild. But probably the most interesting thing about them is their intense ability to regenerate. Many amphibians do have the ability to regenerate, but axolotls blow the competition out of the water. Not only can they perfectly and seemingly endlessly regenerate limbs, but they can also regenerate their spinal cord, jaw, tail, and skin, all without scarring. No matter how many times you cut off the limbs, they'll grow back perfectly. Every single time. And you don't even have to try to cut off the limbs in the first place. You can also even cut the back of their spine. Come back in a moment and a half. You'll be no worse for wear. They are also 1,000 times more resistant to cancer than any other animal. It works like this. After the amputation, the cells at the site of the amputation lose their identity. So instead of being skin cells or blood cells, they become similar to stem cells, called pluripotent cells. And they're able to make any cell or tissue that the body would need to repair itself. In this case, they use the pluripotent cells to generate all the cells and tissues needed to create new, perfect limbs. This phenomenon is a favorite among the scientific community for its potential to help burn victims, amputees, and even cancer victims. Scientists have experimented with modifying the genetic makeup of axolotls to include the green fluorescent protein, which is the protein that makes many jellyfish bioluminescent. While not just making axolotls look cooler, the glowing protein allows scientists to see things inside the axolotls that they couldn't before. For example, they'll tag cancerous cells with the protein, and then they can actually see how it spreads throughout their bodies. Even more interesting, that axolotls have plug-and-play body parts. You can amputate one axolotl's leg and place it in another axolotl, and it'll attach itself. It's especially interesting because you don't even need the whole limb, just a few cells. If you take cells from a neon axolotl and place them on an amputated body of an albino axolotl, the albino axolotl will actually grow a neon limb. Since their skin is quite translucent, you can actually watch the neon green bone grow out of the axolotl. This has led to some fairly morally compromising scientists were able to successfully transplant an axolotl
Wow.
into the back of
And
the
you got
thorax
three
for
beds.
65 weeks after the operation.
Super.
Protecting the head, throwing limbs on with the rest of it. What animal should I check out next? I'm looking for another.
That's not what they happen.
Oh, and then
Right, okay. On three, nobody talks. 3, 2, 1, no talking. I actually think they're probably the coolest animal that we've ever had. Well, if you noticed,
keep getting water like man.
okay, what you noticed on one of the graphs was they can only be found in a certain area in Mexico, right near Mexico City, right, and the graph showed the population of Mexico City, and it's now an incredibly almost extinct creature, right? So to actually get one of those as a pet, I'd be very, very surprised, and it'd probably cost a fortune if you could, right? But the biggest key thing about the axolotl is they love it in exams. It does stem cell stuff, right, that we've talked about. It can do the diffusion, right, using kind of the external gills. It can do all the regeneration stuff, right? It kind of does everything that we've talked about in pretty much all of these. And I think growing another head on the side of one of them, right, again, it's incredible. Okay? Right, if you want to pack your stuff up now then, please.
Say bye, everyone. Say bye.
Do you know when you posted that YouTube video about that? You can see your name. That is
Can you go say hi?
Okay, guys, we're going to go now. Okay, I'm concluding.